morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me and artists Adeline Kueh, Divaagar and Ila this Sunday morning for Living Legacies Artist Panel Discussion. I'm Michelle Lim from Plural Art Mag and I am your moderator for today. Living Legacies is a new digital collaboration between the National Heritage Board and Plural Art Mag for the Singapore HeritageFest 2021. This project explores Singapore's history and heritage through the lens of contemporary visual art. This year's inaugural edition is titled In Sickness and in Health. As we celebrate the 200th anniversary of Singapore's oldest hospital, Singapore General Hospital, this year, we thought it would be a timely occasion to also take a closer look at the traditional healing practices that form a significant part of our culture and heritage. We commissioned 3 artists to explore traditional healing practices such as Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, and traditional Malay medicine. From herbal remedies to wellness influencer culture and wind or angin, each of these artists has come at this topic in their own way, as befits their practices at large. The artists are Adeline Kueh, artist and senior lecturer at LaSalle College of the Arts, whose works invite us to consider the relationships that we have towards the things and rituals around us. Good morning, Adeline. How are you?
Michelle.
And we also have with us Divaagar, an interdisciplinary artist who explores the intersections of bodies, identities, and environments by imbuing narratives into spaces and situations. Hello, Diva.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us today.
Sure.
And last but not least, we also have Ila with us today. Ila is a visual and performance artist whose intimate works generate discussions about gender, history, and identity. Thank you for joining us today, Ila.
Good morning.
Good morning. For today's panel discussion, we'd first like to invite each of the artists to share a little about their process of making the work that they've created for Living Legacies, before going into our Q&A segment. At any time during the panel, if you have any questions for our artists, please type them in the comments and we'll address them during the Q&A. Without further ado, let's invite Adeline to share with us about her work, Roadside Beauties. Adeline?
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'll start off by talking about the early personal relationships I have. On the first slide, you'll see certain images. There's a family portrait of my parents, my sister and myself. And we were standing in front of my grandfather's lemon-colored house, wooden house. And what's interesting is the fact that my father was in the agriculture department for 20 over years, and when he started his career, that's where he met my mother. There's also a cute little image of myself standing next to the lemon tree, which brought me so much joy. When I was about 3.5, we would eat lime tree. We would eat with some sing boy or sour plum stuff into the middle, and it was perfect for the sleepy afternoon. You will also see how during the last Chinese New Year in 2020, my parents came over for our reunion, and that was the last time I saw my parents. And interestingly enough, because I've always been interested in flower viewing or hanami, for the reunion meal, I actually incorporated certain pickled cherry blossoms into the tea, green tea. And it was also a way for us to savor the moment and enjoy having a meal together, but in a more considerate and beautiful setting. My parents are very simple persons, and so that's what got me started. The earlier relationships I have with those histories or moments where I was the errand runner and the resident forager for the family, because at any point in time, my parents or my grandparents would just send me out to pluck some wild ferns in the backyard or anything that's growing wild for the dinner or the meal. Yeah. Let's look at a short video clip from the behind the scene.
Sure, sounds good. Let's take a look.
Yeah. if we care enough to listen and make, then someone else's knowledge or experience would have been validated. I know of friends who, in trying to recall who came up with the recipes involved, took a lot of time, effort, and care to think through and subsequently credit their mothers, fathers, aunts, or grandparents in the process. Thanks. As you can see, we had so much fun working on the project behind the scenes and also in preparing for it. Initially, there was also this part of me where because of the lockdown, in various stages of the lockdown and my immunocompromised self, my movement was restricted. I mean, I was very strict with myself. And then there was a lot of family time and at home, and that also led to a rethinking of my own art practice. Why not be really honest about what was transpiring in and around the home and what it means in terms of the politics of care. And so, and I have a 16-year-old son, so there was this conscious decision on my part to also ensure that I raise him to be the kind of person who is compassionate, who is respectful of the biodiversity in and around us. No doubt we're more stuck in the 9th floor apartment and more of a urban jungle, concrete jungle. So it's an ongoing project, man-child, where I ensure that he gets involved in the food preparations. He's a gourmand foodie, so the best way to make it fun and to ensure that there's bonding is to ask him to be my artist assistant for many of my projects. So and also to learn how to cook his favorite things, because life is fleeting, life is fragile, so there's this element of what if we're not around, and so just a lot of slow food, slowing down of the pace and thinking about what is meaningful. So he gets to make, he learns to make sambal belacan from scratch. He's a bit more brave than I was in cutting, onions, shallots, or even pounding the chili. Like, I would be more worried that it'll burn. And he's like, no issue. So those are some of the things. And reflecting on the idea of my practice as a form of conceptual drawing. How do I draw across time and space? How do I look at personal narratives and history to allow for a kind of rethinking and reclaiming invisible labor, intimate labor, or emotional labor within the home, and make it more meaningful and grounded in my own position as a feminist artist.
I see.
So next slide, please. Yeah, so there was a project that I did that was expanded in 2020, and this particular one was also linked to Plural Art, where I started looking at wildflowers or roadside beauties that are found, and learning different herbs, different wildflowers that and their medicinal or traditional properties, and really getting to know them and from root to leaf, and what it means to not waste and be a bit more sustainable and ethical about how we consume food. And so Kachu Fugetsu was one of the projects that that concept which I expanded for STPI, for example. And interestingly, it's just 4 characters within Japanese kanji: flower, bird, wind, and moon. And that concept refers to how in nature or through nature we understand ourselves better. So I made a lot of cocktails, and so that was bespoke cocktails for an encounter project with STPI, for example. Next slide. So where am I now? I would say that I'm increasingly asking this question of whether love has texture, and primarily it's rooted with the idea of being in isolation, and my point of contact with my elderly parents or with many friends and family members across different spaces and in different parts of the world. Our point of connection usually is through food, right? Or other forms of care and love. So materiality and things such as quilts and patchwork become something that is increasingly important for me. So in that slide previously, you also see gold beads, which are my expansion of what my parents were doing in the 60s when they were courting and they were making the very popular love beads or paper beads. So essentially that's where I am at, and I foresee that later on in the Q&A we will be able to field more questions and expand on some of the cares and concern that we have.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing with us. It's been so nourishing just to hear about the way that your practice comes from this deeply personal place, and you know, it is such a way to connect with nature and connect with family and loved ones during this time. So thank you so much, Adeline, for sharing with us. And now let's go to Divaagar. We'll have Divaagar share a little bit about your work, Soft Salves, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So Soft Salves is sort of a blog format artwork that follows an influencer's journey through learning about Ayurveda. Yeah, before I talk more about the work, let's watch some behind the scenes
Okay,
footage.
let's do that. Yes.
Do I do like a moment where I just like, you know, hey YouTube, it's me. We just went to Take On Market this morning on a Sunday and we got ourselves some produce. Here we have some galangal. It's got a really spicy herbal taste, and yeah, it's great for your masala chai, things like that. The oldest form of communication is through oral transmission, and in some ways, influencer culture is a nod back to it, as the knowledges of Ayurveda was primarily distributed through oral transmissions as well. And even in how Ayurveda is advertised now, often with testimonials from customers, I saw a lot of potential in influencer culture in disseminating the knowledge of this practice. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about what this Soft Salves is all about.
Right. So, you know, as an artist, you know, I'm quite interested in like certain ways of presenting things. And personally for me, I don't really have a strong like background knowledge about Ayurveda before I embarked on this project. And so for me, it was really important to sort of document my own like learning through all of this. So this is really also kind of my journey through Ayurveda. Yeah, so for this project, you know, as like a young person, I'm really, the first avenue that I look to learn about it is through the internet. And so, you know, you enter Google, you type in Ayurveda, and you get a lot of, sure, you get the general information, but also what you get is a lot of centers in Singapore who specialize in Ayurveda, homeopathy, and therapies. And I was very interested in the websites, particularly. So I took some screenshots in the slide of certain things that I found quite interesting about these websites. Whether it's like these stock images of like people, you know, in deep relaxation, or the sort of listicle article sort of segments within the websites. Yeah, and you know, what I found most interesting was also that these websites, they feature testimonials. And yeah, so learning through Ayurveda is one of the things that I noticed was also that it wasn't as like backed up by medical papers, all these
Sure,
things that
yeah.
Western medicine often features. And so what I guess these traditional medicine methods offer is also this personal perspective, which I find quite interesting. It's kind of missing from Western medicine. What you get are like symptoms on the back of the box, but it doesn't really tell you how you'll feel while you take it, which I thought was quite interesting. So these are sort of things I was considering and how, like sort of my journey through it would sort of play out. And I'm also quite interested in how information is being put out these days. Yeah, I guess in the next slide, there's, we have lifestyle bloggers now, we have influencers, people who do makeup tutorials, skincare regimens, all of these things are quite embedded in popular culture now. And it's also a way of, in one sense, to advertise products, but also, to sell a certain lifestyle, but also kind of how to care for yourself along the same way. And it's quite hard to disentangle each other from that. So part of my process was sort of to lean into it. And I found this model to sort of play the influencer in my work, Shavita, who goes by Vita in the work. Yeah, and yeah, so I was quite interested in sort of the aesthetics of the beauty blogger in that sense, going through this fictitious journey and sort of sharing what she's learned, sharing her favorite recipes, putting even like a quiz to find out what your dosha type is. Yeah, so, it's like a fun journey that I think, is an essential part of like, this sort of self-branding culture, right?
Yes, and it really straddles the line between authenticity and like capitalist society. And, I really enjoy that tussle there, but also reflecting the nature of our times, I suppose. Yeah, so thank you, Divaagar, for sharing about ourselves. And we've just talked to Adeline and Divaagar about their artworks, and now it's on to Ila, who will tell us a little bit about Buang Angin. Ila, please.
Thanks for staying on.
Yes.
Maybe before I explain what Buang Angin is about, I want to share a bit about the preliminary preparations of the work. So much like Adeline and what Adeline has shared earlier, I started to think about remedies and treatments from childhood. So being an artist that works a lot with my body, I wanted to find something that's familiar. So angin actually came out almost immediately, because I feel like as a child, my mom would tell me things like, oh, you shouldn't like shower at night because then your body will have wind, and I never questioned this like not to do or to-dos growing up. I just abide to them, and now that I'm older, I feel like some of it makes sense. So I wanted to kind of explore this, and much like what Diva shared, is like a journey to figure out what angin is or what it could be for me and for other people. So in the first slide, as the preliminary preparations, I did an open call to get the public to share what angin means to them or what wind means to them. And it's also the reason why I choose angin or wind is because if you look at traditional practices, there's a lot of wind or concepts of wind being mentioned or practiced. So feng in Chinese, TCM, then there's also the concept of vayu as well. So from these public contributions, I was also thinking a lot about how what are some of the similarities and differences between different practitioners or communities or individuals. And So from there, I actually started to develop the work. So to find out more, maybe we can take a look at the behind the scenes.
Sure, let's take a look at Ila's behind the scenes.
These are remedies passed down from my grandmother to my mother to me, and as a child, I was taught to practice it without question. As I grew older, these remedies begin to make sense, and from them, I start to cultivate my own. Remedy means to heal again and again. Unlike Western approaches of medicine in which we rid of our illnesses with medication and treatments, these daily remedies are not meant to rid one of specific illnesses, but to heal the body from weariness, from overuse, and from exhaustion. Healing the body is a practice that allows for one to rejuvenate and revitalize the body from its daily use.
Thanks for watching the video. So like as you can see from the video, there was a lot of like squishing and a lot of like, you know, touching and bodily stuff, tactile stuff, which I really wanted to explore as well. So I was thinking a lot about the notion of remedies, and remedy itself, the word is actually to heal again, and through the work I was also thinking a lot about Western medicine against traditional medicine or traditional practices, not consciously but subconsciously, you know, it comes out quite a bit. And also with the sharing, there were a lot of things that were brought up, like to compare like what's the difference between Western and you know, the more traditional side of it. So to grow the work, aside from the public contributions, I was also talking to or having conversations with people who are not necessarily practitioners, but they believe deeply in the remedies that they practice. So in my slide, I actually shared images of these people, and surprisingly they're all women. So the first person I talked to was Auntie Kit, and Auntie Kit is a TCM practitioner. So she was sharing about like, you know, within the concept of in TCM for wind, it's not so much like it's just wind, but wind and other elements. So it could be like moist, you know, dry, hot, cool, and that affects the wind. So it could be the body is the wind in the body is too hot, and then outside is too cold. So it's a relationship, like your environment and also your body, right? And how your body reacts to certain foods or certain things you do, like certain kind of like stress you put your body through will affect it one way or another. And I also talked to Ajunta, who we spent a lovely day with, who makes jamu. So she actually shared like a lot about this notion of maintaining through your daily actions, right? The things you eat, the things you do, you exercise. You shouldn't eat your meat with your carbs, because that will really mess up your digestive system. So the one thing that I love about Ajunta was she was straight up saying that, oh, you know, you shouldn't romanticize this notion of wind, because wind is not necessarily like you know, this like something like elemental or something, because she believes it's just your body reacting to like not being able to digest certain food. So what we consume is also as important as what we do to ensure that, you know, we don't adopt bad habits and all that. And then another person that I was working closely with was Jana, who did the keruk on my back, and she was sharing about how she learned the keruk from her parents, and how like when she feels sick, she will get someone to do it for her. So through these meetings, we also practice like the making, right? The making of these things, but also the exchange. So there was a lot of like oral transmission, this notion of like sharing, you know, like being very honest and frank about certain things. So I really loved that in the process. And from there, I started to look at very specific concepts, which is like the idea of maintenance of the body, the idea of repairing the body, right? Which is something we think about a lot when we're taking care of ourselves. So I was thinking a lot in terms of like this notion of self-care, but how do we resist that idea of like buying something to feel good? how can it be something that we practice, like almost like, you know, taking a shower, or something that is natural to us, right? So from there I started to develop the work, and because the opinions are all very differing, I didn't want to say, yeah, this is correct, this is wrong. In my next slide, I would share a bit of the images of the works that I did. So the main work is actually a video work, which is a more metaphorical response to what angin is. So you see like these two bodies under like, you know, fabric, you know, moving around, and then you have my voice in a very badly attempt of ASMR talking about what wind is, you know. Wind is like temperament, you know, wind is like conditions, you know. So it's to actually get people to feel it like in their body, you know, when you see all the massaging happening. It's supposed to like, oh, I want to have that massage. I want someone to touch me and like, you know, I want to squeeze myself. So it's supposed to have that kind of sensation. And accompanying this main video, I also did like instructional videos, 3 instructional videos that is about 2 minutes long, where someone can actually make their own jamu, or they can do kerok for someone else. So it's really about this idea of intimacy and exchange. You know, how do you ensure that you're not pressing too hard, or you know, you're asking someone, you know, where is the pain, you know, things like that. So the videos are not only just about doing the treatments or these remedies, but also thinking beyond, like what does it mean to make it, or to do it, or to do it for yourself, or to do it for someone. Yeah.
I see. So it seems like in Buang Angin, you've really covered both the metaphorical aspect of wind, but also the practical things and tips that, you know, people at home can try. So if you're curious about how to make jamu or how to perform kerok, feel free to go to the Living Legacies website and find out more from how Ila does it. Yeah, so thanks for sharing, Ila. And now that we've heard from all 3 artists, it's time to go to the Q&A segment. And to kick us off, I'd like Divaagar to perhaps tell us a little bit more about what were some surprising or, you know, interesting things that you might have learned about traditional healing practices during your creating process for this work.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it had to do with my own misconceptions of what traditional medicine was. Like Ila explained earlier, it was, I guess it's like a regulatory sort of thing rather than you're ill, so here's a cure.
Right.
And I think, yeah, like going through learning about it online was quite interesting in that sense. But also, I guess, on another note, how this information also gets transmitted. You know, if you're on Facebook and you have like hobby groups like urban gardeners, someone asks, what herb can cure cancer? And then or if you're even on WhatsApp, like extended family group chats, you get a lot of these, like, these herbs can, you know, be good for your liver. They're, you know, they increase your blood flow, all these things. And yeah, so, you know, even like thinking about how these sort of traditional knowledge, you know, it's remembered, it's spread, it's misremembered. It's all quite interesting to me. That's what I learned.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what you were saying about how you wanted to explore communication, right, in all its aspects. How about Adeline? Like, would you like to
add? Yeah, I think what Diva has mentioned is really true too. In this project, when I was asking for contributions of various cooling remedies or recipes, the liang as opposed to the more jua or the yang kinds, I realized that every family has their own style of doing things, and that's perfectly fine. I think there's that, it is important to acknowledge this element of that authenticity is not something that we need to be too concerned with. And it's about adaptation. In order for culture, particularly culture that's orally transmitted, adaptation is part of that process. And with COVID-19, it's even more significant that we make do. And this is precisely, it's a kind of knowledge system and tradition that we abide by and we adapt through the years, so that for the future generations, what if these plants or these wildflowers are not available, then what other ones can we work with? Or with Ila's buang angin and kerokan, for example, I do kuasa. So if I'm feeling feverish, I will desperately try and work on it myself. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know, Ila, you've gotten many responses from people about the different ways to approach wind. So how do you feel about these different inputs in addition to the ones that you've learned from your grandmother and your mother? Were there others that you've adopted into your ways of dealing with wind?
I feel like I firstly want to like credit like these generous kind of contributions that have helped kind of shape the work, right? Because in the video at the last part, it's all the contributions that you hear. So it's not so much like about adopting immediately, but it's something that lingers, like, hey, I've heard about this, maybe I could try this. It's almost like the source is someone I might never meet, but because, hey, that probably makes sense. One of the things that was shared in Dispelling Wind is this thing called omam water. That is something I'm not familiar with, but it's quite common in Indian families, and I've never seen it before. So I was like very curious what this omam water is, like, for example. So it opens up or broadens, the possibilities of it's not just from my family, it could be from someone else or somewhere else that
Right.
yeah.
It was interesting to think about like people that you might never meet. It's the way that wind is also invisible, but then it has impact on you. Yeah.
But I think the crossovers between the various three projects are really quite telling in terms of how these practices are very much ingrained in who we are, right? And like Ila, I'm totally thankful to the contributors, and primarily because in trying to transcribe some of the recipes that were orally transmitted, they had to quantify the amount, because previously it's always agak-agak, right, which is estimation, and you have to have the know-how to do these things. Also, there was a part on my part to ask the various contributors to think about the honoring where they learned the recipes from. So to me, that was also that link to the past, right? And not in a nostalgic way, but in a way that we can reclaim and consciously work against forgetting.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you brought up, because I think we live in a world where there are certain knowledges that are more predominant, and maybe it's too easy to lose touch with your roots if you don't go back and look for it. I mean, for me, language is also a barrier. I don't know about how you feel about it, Diva. I think it's hard for me to go back to my grandparents, to be honest, to like ask them about their knowledge, even though my grandpa is good at Tuina, like reflexology, but it's hard to cross that bridge.
Right, yeah.
How about you?
I have the same problem. My Chinese grandmother speaks Tamil, so it's hard. Yeah, I think there's a lot of information that gets lost along the way just because we don't really keep in touch, right? I think it's also knowing sometimes your ideas of like what taking care of yourself, it changes, and it's not always congruent with, like the theories of traditional medicine or Western medicine, and you kind of just adapt it for yourself. And sometimes you'll just, I guess it's also a matter of how you respond to new information and all these things, and adapt it for yourself. For me, I guess it's taken a longer time to be more open to like these concepts, but at the same time, even just eating mostly Indian cooking throughout my life, like you realize a lot of the knowledge has already been put into your food, you know, and it's not even a conscious effort sometimes, and that's quite interesting too. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm also curious about where you got the recipe for turmeric latte and the face mask that Vita has on her.
The face mask is authentically something I do at home.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
Diva, you are Vita.
In
some
real life.
way. I will never really. I still don't buy into the turmeric lattes, only because turmeric is best. You know, you get the best stuff out of it through cooking it in fat, oil, ghee. Yeah, so you know, sometimes I guess you could cook it in cream, but it just seems like if you're already going to eat it, like it's fine, you know. So that just seems like it's also kind of a more contemporary thing, turmeric lattes, that's now being marketed, and I thought it was quite interesting, you know, like what's the next new herb that could be out there. Yeah, I think ashwagandha is kind of like the new big thing, right?
Moringa.
Yeah, moringa as well. So yeah, you know, quite interested to see what comes next to Starbucks, you know.
Yeah, but it's also a question of who discovers the
Yeah.
herb, right? I mean, that maybe ancient cultures already knew all about how to prepare it, but
It's kind of crazy when it becomes a trend and then it gets inflated, like avocados, for example. Not in health wise, but how, you know, it's so mass produced that it's like the kind, like where it's from, it's not even affordable there anymore. So things like that, like it's like the whole like capitalistic commodification actually makes it like this monstrous thing that becomes like, that is almost counterintuitive to the act of like slow healing. What does that mean? So yeah, there is that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's totally true, and I think hopefully it doesn't affect your cooking. Are all three of you guys avid cooks at home? I think Adeline, you've spoken a little bit about that.
I think that sometimes we have outlets to our, you know, to release the pressure or the stresses and anxiety, especially during the stages of lockdown. I find that again, maybe it's because I miss what you don't know, you don't miss. I firmly believe in that. And sometimes, when you can't readily just go out and buy something that you wish to have, like durian blossoms, for example, you try and find other plants that have maybe similar textures. Maybe the young jackfruit fibers are quite close to it. So you try to replicate and work with comfort food that hopefully isn't too sinful. Yeah.
I see. Okay, we've got a question here from Tamarin for Diva.
Okay.
The question is, what are your opinions on Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop?
You know, I guess going back to what you explained earlier, right? You know, in some ways, I guess like that's quite relevant to Vita because you know, she is like a face for like a lifestyle in some sense. I think that's what Gwyneth Paltrow does with Goop. That said, I guess you know, it's a corporation. It's meant. I think that one. It's quite obvious that it is trying to sell you things.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, you know, it's really just a hyper, you know, push for like these sort of products, this sort of lifestyle. Yeah, I mean, they have a TV show about it, and you know, it's really just meant to push your like, yeah, just push you this lifestyle, I guess. And you know, I'm not a big fan because I guess in some ways it's also quite related to these sort of influencer cultures where they will adopt the most sellable points of the lifestyle they're trying to sell you, or the treatments, like what's the good parts, but they never really show you the bad when it comes to like how fast like, you know, consumerism goes as compared to like, you know, like really that ironically slow, like regulatory, like, you know, methods that you take to take care of yourself. It's like, yeah, are you really buying a product or are you taking care of yourself? And sometimes you don't know, you know, and that's what, you know, makes it so effective, right?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there about how sometimes that capitalist stream of speed kind of is counterproductive, perhaps, to traditional wisdom. And on a different note, we have a question from Meredith that perhaps Ila, you might want to like talk about. Meredith is wondering if you could share your thoughts or opinions on how the different ethno-medicines best intersect. Like, do you find that there were certain similarities or differences in the kinds of contributions you've come in, or the kinds of practitioners that you've interviewed?
I feel like one thing that was really striking is that for all three, again, don't want to do the CMI kind of thing, but for all three, that the three branches that were explored, the notion of balance comes out a lot. This idea of keeping balance or maintaining a certain kind of balance. And I wouldn't really focus so much on differences because it's so varied. It's so varied in small ways. Like one person could be like, it's okay to wash my hair as long as I dry it before sleep. When another person could go, no, cannot, still wet, you know, the pores will still be wet. So it's also dependable on the body. So there's no way to kind of like say like within the ethno-medicine kind of trajectories that there's very like big differences as well. Yeah, or maybe because again I'm not an expert, I haven't really like delved into it much. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense, especially if you think about also how even in Ayurveda or TCM, there are different body types, right? So what works for one person may not work for the other. And so I think that speaks to what
and
you
even
say.
if you stay here and it's tropical and then your body is this type and then you go over to like maybe a temperate climate and then your body is like changing to that climate as well. So it doesn't also fit, you know.
Yeah, that makes me think about Adeline's project actually, because you know the heating and cooling kind of concept, right? Have you does it work differently for different members of your family, for example, or do you find that when you travel together somewhere else, you tweak the ways that you deal with these recipes?
Interestingly enough, you know, one of the most common denominator for anything cooling is usually the level of bitterness or alkalinity in the plant. So fortunately, the way that we've my husband Tim and I, we are very fond of bitter gourd and bitter things, no issue. So from young we train the lad to be exposed to it. So he'll take bitter gourd and celery, green apple juice, for example, no complaints. And it's also to go back to this idea of how our tongues are generally divided into 4 segments, and you know, sweet, savory, sour, and bitter. There are zones to receptors to pick out these things, and but our modern day diet is actually very devoid of the alkaline, the bitter element, which is why then a lot of fried food and you know, fast food culture tend to be more heaty. And I always go back to a Hokkien Teochew saying that, you know, the bitter bit is the core, and sometimes jiak core, which is to eat bitter or to know how to eat bitter, is something that metaphorically as well as physically actually important. And it's also about this element of being able to jiak core also refers to the ability to know hardship or to be more resilient. And to me that is the extra layer of this traditional knowledge system that is important. When we travel, I can't boil my liang teh. They're quite okay. They've experimented. They were my guinea pigs in the house for the past year and a bit. But when we travel, we actually bring the Swedish bitters, which is known as an elixir with tons of herbs. It's in a concentrate tincture, so you just travel with it. If you feel, can dab it for your ulcers. You have sore throat, you can gargle with it, and it's awesome for digestive, acidity and reflux in the.
That's so interesting because I feel like a lot of the very popular herbs, they are so useful in so many different ways. And I do wonder, do you guys have a favorite herb or something like that you go to all the time? Maybe Ila?
I feel like for me, like herb-wise, I'm not really an expert, but I love to eat ulam. Like I feel like that's like the best thing to eat with your nasi padang, and it's always missing in nasi padang shops because it helps to kind of like make all. If not, you eat like your rendang or whatever, then your rice, right, and then your sambal stuff, but you don't have that ulam to help you make everything flow nicely. So yeah, that's my favorite. I can eat that, and it's a different raw vegetables put together with sambal on the side, and it's like whatever is available. Yeah, and that's my favorite.
Yeah, it does that good job of balancing.
Helping.
The other fatty
Fiber, enzymes, right?
yeah. How about you, Diva?
Favorite herb?
Yeah.
What's my favorite herb?
Ingredient.
But there's a lot. I grow a lot of them, but I guess at the moment, what do I have at the moment? I have a very big blue pea plant. Yeah, it's as tall as I am, which is yeah. So I've been collecting the flowers, but I'm not actually very sure of what the medicinal properties are. I think it's just very pretty.
You're just collecting it to dye clothes.
That's right. Yeah.
Antidepressant. Because the color is very
I actually
uplifting.
saw blue pea flowers that are white.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have the white ones too.
Oh, what are the white ones for?
They just don't have the color.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you can still use it.
Yeah.
You can still
You
eat
can
it
still
in
make
your
you can
the
still make
tea.
tea with it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't lose its medicinal properties.
Yeah.
Just you can't use it to dye
Yeah,
fabric.
it's just like less aesthetic.
All right.
Is it called pea flower then?
still.
Yeah.
Yeah,
pea
yeah,
flower,
pea flower.
Okay.
butterfly
Pea.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a question from the HeritageFest Facebook page from Victoria. She asks, and this is a question for anyone, so maybe Adeline, you might want to consider it. What did you find most surprising when you were preparing for these artworks?
Most surprising. I would say that because foraging is technically not legal. I mean, you have to be careful about state parks and proprietary boundaries. What was surprising was the fact that I had to scout for markets. Different markets would have a different range of cooling herbs and plants. So I actually went to quite a few. And eventually I was thinking for my own sanity and also carbon footprint, I ended up going to the same one that I've been going, Serangoon Market at Serangoon Avenue 3. And surprisingly, the generosity of the stall owners, if you're willing to try and make a fool out, and not worry about making a fool out of yourself with your limited language, because you have to speak to them in whatever works, right? My Mandarin is not great, so I revert to Hokkien and Teochew and gestures. But it was wonderful, and Mr. Neo actually contributed a cooling remedy, which is with the snow chrysanthemum and cane sugar. Yeah, so that was really nice. The meaningful connections that we can achieve through these kinds of projects and through our openness and willingness to listen to each other.
That's so nice to know. And I guess on that note, perhaps we would like to maybe let's have one more question before we end. And but that's such a nice sharing because Mr. Neo is, I think, your fruit, the
Vegetable,
market
yeah.
vegetable seller, and he's contributed to the project as well. And I think in terms of surprising moments in this project, would Ila or Diva like to respond to that?
Surprising.
Let me see.
Finding, I guess maybe at the end of it all, when I'm looking back and reflecting on this, this idea of, we're talking about living legacies, self-care as legacy. And to me, for someone who's had a number of close shaves with death, my ongoing project with training my son is also to ensure that if there is a zombie apocalypse, he can be self-sustaining. He knows how to make all the necessary stuff, right?
Surprising moment. Diva, you want to go first?
Oh yeah. I guess during the research part of the project, when I guess we watched the workshops with ACM, and we had like a private session with Vasanthi.
Yeah, Vasanthi from the
Yeah.
Ayurveda Association.
Yeah, and I think she explained that actually there's a most of the people that are interested in Ayurveda that she gets are from Taiwan.
Right, right.
Yeah, and not necessarily like Indian people, which I think is quite interesting how we can all sort of branch out these knowledges.
Yeah, I guess that really speaks to the cross-cultural like applications of traditional healing practices. It doesn't matter where we start from, the languages that we know, but it's about that curiosity and to find what works and what we can make do with, right? Yeah, and I guess on that note, just one very last question for Ila. What was your favorite part about this project?
Favorite part? Actually got a lot of favorite parts. I think my favorite parts is when I was doing the main work, right? So Sonia and I, we were like we were topless, right? Because we were shooting our bodies, but we were so comfortable. And then like scenes where we had to I had to massage her and she had to massage me, and she's like, I'm not an expert, never mind, just go with it. And she's like checking in, like, is this okay? I'm like, yeah, it's okay. And it just felt very nice. It felt like I was sharing a very strange a thing with someone, because usually it's like we're making work, but this is like something that we're also very conscious that this is good for our body. This is something that will make so after like the shoot and all that, we're just like chilling and like, wow, okay, that feels nice. And yeah, that was probably like one of my favorite parts.
I see. And I guess then in that sense the massage worked. Yeah, and what a nice way to infuse that art aspect with the life aspect. I think that's my favorite part about this project. And I guess with that, we've come to the end of our panel discussion. If you haven't checked out our Living Legacies site yet, please do take a look at the Living Legacies page. The URL is on your screen. It's livinglegacies.pluralartmag.com. And you can also find the microsite through our magazine homepage, pluralartmag.com. This event has been brought to you by Plural Art Mag in collaboration with National Heritage Board and is part of the Singapore HeritageFest 2021. If you enjoyed this, do check out the many other events that are happening until the end of May that you can enjoy from the comfort of your home. For example, some of these events include Cinema Reclaimed Live Dialogue, which takes place next Saturday morning. It's a special film collaboration between researchers To Hoon Ping and Ben Slater, and it's centered around the theme of medicine and modernity. For more information, check out the web pages listed on this slide or browse the Singapore HeritageFest website for more exciting programs. Finally, we'd like to say a very, very big thank you to all our artists here, Adeline, Diva, Ila, for sharing your experiences. And a very big thank you to you too, the audience, for taking the time to join us this morning. Take care, have a great Sunday, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.